We usually imagine memory as a filing cabinet, a physical hard drive where distinct files are written to specific sectors, sitting perfectly still. But when you look at the architecture of a mammalian brain, an ecosystem, or a quantum neural network, there is no static storage. Instead, physics and biology operate within a continuous, highly turbulent environment. In the A-model framework, particles and data points aren't isolated objects floating in a vacuum. They are specific, vibrating configurations of an underlying dynamical field. If the universe is in constant fluid motion, a memory cannot be a locker holding static data. A memory must be a precise structural pattern, a shape, that manages to hold its form while the chaotic currents of the universe rush around it. For a fleeting moment to become a permanent record, it has to achieve what physicists call topological persistence. The building blocks of this persistence are phase relationships. Whenever waves in this continuous field interact, their peaks and troughs align in very specific ways. The precise timing of these alignments encodes information. Maintaining that alignment requires fighting a constant mathematical war. On one side is phase entropy, the natural tendency of ordered waves to scatter into random noise. On the other side is coherence, the force that binds those waves into a synchronized, stable shape. We don't have to rely on metaphors to describe this battle. We can mathematically track exactly how a structure survives the constant pressure of entropy. By charting the math from basic background noise to deep synchronization, we can see exactly how the universe twists itself into complex, permanent structures called reality knots. To understand exactly how a memory survives, we must first measure exactly how a memory is destroyed. Imagine information represented by a single phase vector, spinning predictably. External interactions bombard the field, fracturing it into hundreds of oscillators rotating at random speeds. The mathematical measure of this exact disorder is phase entropy. Think of a stadium wave. If thousands of fans stand up in perfect sequence, the wave travels around the arena. If those same fans stand up at random intervals, the wave dissolves into meaningless movement. Random phase rotations destroy the informational signal. When you look closely at the equations of motion, the continuous growth of this phase dispersion is the literal mechanism of forgetting. A field dominated by high phase entropy simply cannot hold its geometry. The chaotic turbulence shreds any historical pattern, wiping the system's slate completely clean. To hold onto a pattern, the system must generate a counterforce, coherence. Coherence is mathematically locked to entropy in an inverse relationship. As the phase dispersion shrinks, the structural coherence of the system spikes upward. A memory materializes only when local coherence crosses a specific mathematical minimum limit, the critical threshold. If the coupling between internal oscillators is weak and falls below this limit, the structure breaks down and dissolves back into the background noise. But cross that threshold, and the synchronized phases lock. The network becomes rigid enough to resist outside interference tearing at its edges. A memory is born exclusively in rare, isolated pockets of the field, where local synchronization is dense enough to overpower universal entropy.
Until now, we've looked at this mathematically as a flat spatial geometry. To observe a memory, we stretch the field forward along a temporal axis. This is the temporal memory operator, an integrated accumulation over time. We measure this accumulation using a temporal correlation criterion. This equation calculates exactly how much a past configuration dictates the present state of the field. If this mathematical correlation remains strong across a long time delay, the past successfully imposes its geometry onto the present. A system truly remembers when this correlation bridges the gap. The historical shape refuses to break down, allowing past events to steer the physics of the present day. In physical reality, these phase relationships do not rotate in flat two-dimensional circles. They twist through complex multi-dimensional spaces. To calculate these dynamics, we need an extension of complex numbers called quaternions. Quaternions map rotation within the higher dimensional geometry of the field. Highly coherent structures here form topologically stable reality knots. Their signature is a closed loop that fails to map back to its starting identity. After a full rotation, the structure does not reset. This measurable gap is called residual holonomy. It is a permanent geometric scar left in the field by an unresolved cycle. We can map this abstract topology directly to the mammalian brain. When a localized phase configuration stores an unresolved structure over time, we see the physical manifestations of rigid behavioral memory. In this framework, biological trauma is a topological loop that cannot relax its local entropy. It becomes a persistent nodal structure, a permanent, inescapable attractor that forces the nervous system to repeatedly revisit the exact same phase geometry. Trauma, like any deep memory, is not a software file waiting to be deleted. It is a literal physical knot in the system's geometry that forcefully bends present reality to align with the past. Let's pull back to the macro view of the universe. In this continuous, turbulent field, maintaining that vortex requires effort. These spatial variations in coherence produce what we call memory stress energy. Every coherent reality knot sits in direct opposition to the universal flow of entropy. Holding that shape together against the pressure of the surrounding noise requires continuous systemic energy. Memory is never free. It is an active, energy-consuming deformation of the universe's baseline state. If memory is a stable geometric knot, why do biological systems and quantum networks inevitably forget? Forgetting is not a hardware failure or a biological error. It is a mechanism of entropic filtering. If a system perfectly remembered every phase interaction, the infinite accumulation of stress energy would become unsustainable. The rigid structure of the memory would overwhelm the field, causing the entire system to collapse. The continuous pressure of entropy acts as a necessary sieve. It breaks down the weak connections, ensuring that only the most highly coherent, critical reality knots survive the temporal journey. Memory is the optimal, fragile equilibrium between the stubborn persistence of structure and the inevitable, necessary erasure of chaos.